You know, I had a conversation recently that stopped me in my tracks. Someone came to me, successful, accomplished, genuinely impressive human being, and they said, I've built everything I set out to build. I'm exactly where I wanted to be. So why does everyone keep asking me when I'm going to find someone, like my life doesn't count until I do? And I looked at them and I wanted to say something that nobody seems willing to say out loud. What if they're right? What if the most powerful thing you could do, the thing that would actually unleash your greatest potential, is to stay single? Not because you're broken, not because you're afraid, but because you understand something that most people have been carefully taught not to see. There's a pattern in history that nobody talks about. The individuals who bent reality to their will, who created works that outlived empires, so many of them walked alone. Not by accident, by design. And the question isn't why they stayed single. The question is why we've been so thoroughly convinced that this path is somehow lesser, somehow incomplete. Because once you understand what solitude actually gives you, what it unlocks in the architecture of your existence, you'll see that the real trap isn't being alone. The real trap is the one they've been selling you since childhood, wrapped in white lace and promises of completion. So let me take you through something, not to convince you to leave your partner or to reject love, but to show you what sovereignty actually means. And why, for some people, for the ones who see clearly, staying single isn't a consolation prize. It's the grand prize itself. There's a story from ancient Greece that haunts me. Alexander the Great, conqueror of the known world, master of armies, ruler of an empire that stretched from Greece to India, sought out a philosopher named Diogenes. He found him living in a barrel, owning nothing, beholden to no one. Alexander stood before him, casting a shadow over the old man, and said, I am Alexander the Great. Ask me for anything and it shall be yours. And Diogenes looked up at this man who commanded nations and said, yes, move a little to the left, you're blocking my sunlight. Now, the story usually ends there, with Alexander marveling at Diogenes' indifference to power. But there's something deeper happening in that moment. Alexander reportedly said afterward, if I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes. Think about that. The most powerful man in the world, envying the freedom of a man who owned nothing and answered to no one. What did Diogenes have that Alexander, with all his empire, could never possess? He had sovereignty over himself. Complete, uncompromised, undiminished sovereignty. Alexander went home to palaces and wives and obligations. He spent his evenings managing the emotions of generals, negotiating with rivals, maintaining the vast machinery of power. His time was never his own. His mind was never quiet. He was trapped inside the empire he'd built. Diogenes went back to his barrel. His time was his own. His thoughts were his own. Nobody needed him to be anything other than what he was. Now, here's what the world won't tell you. They'll tell you that Alexander won because he conquered nations. They'll tell you that having a partner, a family, a conventional life is winning. But they never ask the question that matters. Who was actually free? Who actually owned their life? And this pattern, this strange truth, it repeats throughout history. The people who changed everything, who created lasting works, who pushed human understanding forward, so many of them guarded their solitude like it was sacred. Because it was. Nietzsche never married. Schopenhauer never married. Tesla never married. Emily Dickinson never married. Beethoven, Da Vinci, Newton, Kant, the list goes on. And the world looks at this and says, well, they were lonely. They were damaged. They couldn't make relationships work. But what if that's exactly backward? What if they saw something most people don't? What if they understood that to do what they needed to do, to become what they needed to become, they required something more valuable than companionship? They required undivided attention to their own becoming. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Because the world has convinced you that wanting solitude is selfish, that prioritizing your own growth, your own purpose, your own sovereignty is somehow a moral failing. That the highest good is to split yourself in half and give that half to someone else. But let me ask you something. Is it selfish to refuse to dilute your potential? Is it selfish to say, I have something to create that requires everything I am? Is it selfish to choose the path that makes you most fully yourself, even if that path doesn't include a +1? Nietzsche had this thought experiment. He called it eternal recurrence. The idea is simple. Imagine you had to live your exact life again, precisely as it is, every moment, every choice, every experience, repeated infinitely, forever. Most people recoil from this idea, because when they're honest, they're not living their life, they're living a script someone else wrote. The script says, get educated, get a career, get married, have children, retire, die. And somewhere in the middle of that, if you're lucky, maybe you squeeze in a hobby. But Nietzsche asks, what if you could say yes to eternal recurrence? What if your life was so authentically yours, so completely an expression of your will, that you'd be thrilled to live it again and again forever? And here's the thing, you can't say yes to that if you're living someone else's idea of what your life should be. You can't say yes to that if you've traded your sovereignty for security, your purpose for partnership, your becoming for belonging. Nietzsche wasn't against love. He was against the kind of love that diminishes you, the kind that makes you smaller, more domesticated, more housebroken. He called it the love of the neighbor, this thing where you sacrifice who you could be for who someone else needs you to be. And he talked about the Übermensch, the person who creates their own values instead of accepting the values handed to them. Now, people misunderstand this concept. They think it's about being a Superman, about dominating others. But it's not. It's about self-mastery. It's about becoming the author of your own existence. And here's what nobody tells you. You cannot become the Übermensch. You cannot create your own values. You cannot author your own existence if you're constantly negotiating that existence with another person. Because the moment you enter a traditional relationship, you accept a fundamental premise that your life is no longer entirely your own to direct. Your time becomes negotiable. Your priorities become shared. Your decisions require consensus. And slowly, gradually, almost invisibly, you begin to edit yourself. You smooth out the edges that might cause conflict. You moderate the ambitions that might threaten the relationship. You learn to want what's reasonable, what's practical, what keeps the peace. Schopenhauer understood this. He lived alone for most of his life, working in the mornings, walking in the afternoons, thinking in the evenings. He had no spouse to consult, no children to raise, no domestic drama to navigate. His time was entirely his own. His mind was entirely his own. And people called him a misanthrope, a misogynist, a bitter old man. But read his work. Read the depth of thought, the clarity of insight, the architectural beauty of his philosophy. That doesn't come from bitterness. That comes from undivided attention to truth. He wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. And if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is really free." Think about that. Really think about it. When you're alone, genuinely alone, not lonely but sovereign, you are free to think any thought, pursue any interest, explore any idea without justifying it to another consciousness. Your life becomes a laboratory of self-discovery rather than a negotiation table. And this is what Nietzsche meant by solitude being necessary for creation. Not isolation, not withdrawal from the world, but this fundamental sovereignty over your own attention, your own time, your own becoming. Einstein said something similar. He called it a kind of monasticism. He needed vast stretches of uninterrupted time to think the thoughts that would revolutionize physics. And while he was married, his letters reveal the cost. The constant tension between his need for solitude and the demands of domestic life. The way his work suffered when he had to be a husband and father rather than a mind pursuing truth. What the world calls loneliness, these people called workspace. What the world calls isolation, they called freedom. And what the world calls love, they often recognized as a beautiful cage. Now, let me tell you about the Stoics, because they understood something profound about human psychology. They understood that you only have control over one thing in this life, your own mind. Everything else, every single other thing, is outside your control. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in Rome, an emperor who commanded legions, spent his private moments writing meditations that reveal this truth. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And here's what's fascinating. Marcus Aurelius was married. He had obligations, duties, endless responsibilities. And you can feel in his writing the weight of it, the constant drain of managing other people's needs, other people's emotions, other people's expectations. He found peace only in those stolen moments of solitude, writing to himself, reminding himself of what mattered. And what he reminds himself of again and again is that true peace comes from within. That external circumstances, including relationships, cannot give you the tranquility you seek. Now imagine for a moment that Marcus Aurelius had been single. Imagine all that energy he spent navigating the complex emotional landscape of marriage and family. All those resources he poured into maintaining domestic harmony, redirected entirely toward his own philosophical development, his own governance, his own becoming. Would he have been a better emperor? Would his meditations have gone even deeper? We'll never know. But the question is worth asking. The Stoics had this concept, memento mori. Remember that you will die. Not as morbid obsession, but as liberation. You have finite time, finite attention, finite energy. Every moment you spend managing someone else's emotional weather is a moment you're not spending on your own development, your own purpose, your own confrontation with mortality. And in a relationship, so much energy goes toward this management. Your partner had a bad day, you absorb it. They're anxious about something, you soothe it. They need reassurance, you provide it. And none of this is wrong, exactly. But it's a choice.